Hi class, this is Mrs. Wendt, and our unit for this next 2 weeks is going to be cell growth, division, and reproduction. Okay, so you can see in this picture here we've got a mama eagle and she's feeding her baby eaglets. And these baby eaglets started off as one cell big, and after they've had a period of time to grow inside the egg inside their mom, and then when the egg was laid, they grew some more inside that egg. And then after the egg was hatched, then they can grow a lot beyond that until they turn into an adult bird like their mom. So how does that happen? How do animals and plants get from one tiny individual cell into these gigantic, complicated living creatures? That's what this chapter is all about. Okay, so in your textbook, this is chapter 11, and we're going to start with the first section. So 11.1 would be how we label that. And what we're going to try to learn in this presentation today is some of the difficulties a cell faces as it increases in size. So when cells grow bigger, things start getting hard and complicated. So why is that? What are those things? And then we also want to figure out the difference between sexual and asexual reproduction. So what's the difference between these guys and why do we care? Okay, so that is what we want to know by the end of this video. All right, so first off, some students maybe did an activity with this in Biology A. I know not everybody got to do it depending on your teacher and makeup work and all that other stuff that we're dealing with. Okay, so we're just going to review this real quick. So in a cube, we can calculate the surface area. So if we were going to paint this cube, how much paint would it take to paint the front and the side and the top, and then also the left side that we can't see, the back we can't see, and the bottom we can't see. Okay, so there's 6 different sides. How much paint would it take to cover all of them? That's the surface area. And the volume is how much space is inside. Okay, so if we were going to fill this cube up with water, how much water do we need to fill it up? So you've calculated these for different shapes in math class. And cells, for the most part, a lot of them are kind of a cube shape or a circle shape or something similar to that. We're going to stick with a cube because it's really easy to calculate math-wise, even though we know cells come in lots of different shapes. All right, so this is the formulas for finding these. So to find the surface area of a cube, you take one side, the length times the width, and that'll tell you one side. And because there's 6 sides, then we can multiply it by 6 to get the surface area for the whole thing. Volume for a cube, length times width times height. All right. So for these two cubes, or these two formulas for this cube, so the surface area would be 6 square centimeters. And the volume would be 1 cubic centimeter. And this one is squared centimeters because we took centimeters times centimeters. So we did that twice. This one had 1, 2, 3 centimeters multiplied together. That's why that's centimeters cubed. All right. So that's how we would find the surface area and the volume of this box. And we're going to pretend these boxes are cells. Now, if we have some bigger cells, then their surface area and the volume are going to be bigger as well. So looks something like this. I'm not going to do all the math with you to save time. But this one here that's 2 centimeters across, this would have a surface area of 24, and it have a volume of 8. This guy here would be 54 and 27. All right, so as the cubes get bigger, these numbers get bigger also. But the amount the surface area and volume change don't match each other. Okay, so if you look at here from 24 to 54, that's like about twice as big, right? But 8 to 27, that's closer to 3 times as big. So we have this situation where as the cubes get bigger in size, the area does get bigger and the volume does get bigger, but if we take the area divided by the volume, that ratio gets smaller over time. Okay, so this little cell here has a ratio of 6. This medium-sized cell has a ratio of 3. This guy has a ratio of 2. Okay, and why do we care? Okay, why do we care that small cells have the most surface area and big cells have the smallest surface area in this ratio? Well, the job of the cell membrane and the outside of these cells here, the surface area would be like all of the cell membrane of this three-dimensional cell. So there'd be cell membrane on the front and the back and the top and the bottom. The job of that cell membrane is to let things in and out. So if you have a really big ratio, a big amount of surface area compared to your volume, that means there's lots of places in that cell for things to get in and out. So good things like food and vitamins and water can get in, and waste and garbage can get back out. Okay. Another way to look at this is if you were anywhere inside this cell, if you were in the exact center, it's not very far away to get out, to get to an exit. But if you're in this huge cell over here, it's a lot farther to get to an exit, to get out. So if you had a bunch of garbage in the center of this big cell, it would be a lot more complicated to get that garbage out than in a small cell. So the small cells can get rid of trash a lot easier than big cells. Okay, so another way to think about this, your textbook talks about this picture here, where you have, as something grows bigger, so like if you think of this cell as a city, you know, there's a garbage collector and there's a manager and there's highways and roads and power plants. The more people go in the city and the bigger the city is, the more traffic you have, you see people waiting in lines, it gets congested and harder to move around. And for a cell, that same thing happens. If the cell gets really big, the DNA can't keep up with all the things it has to take care of, all the new things it has to build, all the things that break down and need to be fixed. Okay, so bigger cells are just a lot harder to run, just like bigger cities are harder to run. Okay, and in a cell, you have traffic problems, right? We have to get garbage from one place to another. We have to get proteins from one place to another. And if the cell volume gets too big, there's not enough surface area to get food in, to get garbage out, and it's really hard to get everything where it needs to be. So big cells are not very healthy compared to small cells. There's a lot of problems when you're a big cell. Okay, so one way to fix this problem is to take a big cell and divide it in half. All right, and this is called cell division. So as a creature grows bigger, you know, you grew from a baby to a toddler to a preschool to a teenager, you're made of all kinds of cells. And as these cells grow bigger, eventually they get big enough where it's just not healthy and working out so good, and it's better if they divide and split in half. So you see this bacteria cell right here, you can see a place where it's just kind of coming together in the middle, and this is getting ready to break into two separate cells. Okay, so that's cell division, having a cell break in half. When it does that, we're going to end up with two daughter cells. Now, they're not female, that's not a thing. Somebody in the past called them daughters, and it just stuck. So they don't have boy and girl parts, they're just called daughter cells from tradition. And before this cell can divide, though, we have to make a copy. We have to replicate the DNA. Okay, so this big cell has one copy of all the information. We need a second copy, so the original can stay on one side, and the copy can be in the new cell. Okay, so before the cell breaks in half, we have to make a copy of that information. So both cells have that information. Okay, and then dividing will make more smaller cells that keeps the surface area to volume ratio high. Okay, so that means that there's plenty of places where things can enter and exit and the cells stay healthy. All right, so we're going to learn a lot more about the steps of cell division in the next few days. Okay, but we want to make sure we know why cells do cell division. And it's because large cells just aren't healthy. It's much better to have lots of small, healthy cells than a few really big cells that are having trouble making everything work. All right, now there's two types of reproduction. The first one is asexual. And anytime you put the letter A in front of a word, this in biology and in the Latin means not. So this is reproduction without sex. So no sex reproduction. And there's a couple pictures here to show you this. All three of these pictures, it's a single parent, so like one organism, and it's going to produce a genetically identical offspring. So another word for this would be a clone. Okay, so maybe you've heard of that word before with people trying to clone their pets, or in a lot of science fiction movies or TV shows, there's clones of things, right? All right, so when we're making a new organism this way, the baby is going to be genetically identical or exactly the same to the parent. Okay, now that doesn't mean it's always going to look the same. If the two cells, if one of them gets put in the sunshine and one of them gets put in the dark, or one of them gets more food than the other, one of them gets injured, they maybe won't look exactly the same their whole lives, but their DNA inside are exactly the same. Oh, whoops. So I want to just kind of show you these three pictures real quick. They're also in your textbook. So this first picture is a bacteria, and this bacteria picture has one large cell that's starting to divide into two. And bacteria cells are pretty simple. They'll have a copy of DNA on each side, and they'll just split the ribosomes and cytoplasm kind of in half. This middle will pinch off together, and you have two new cells. That's pretty simple. Okay. Now this middle thing here, this creature is called a hydra. Okay, so now the parent is here. I'm kind of outlining the parent, and it has some tentacles on one end. Okay, and then a long body tube here. And actually, it's creating two offspring by something called budding. So there's one baby kind of growing out of this side, and there's a second baby kind of growing out of this side. If a human were to do this, then you'd just be walking around and you'd have like a second head growing out of your shoulder or out of your back. Okay, so he's just growing another copy of himself, and when it gets big enough, it'll break off and float away and be its own creature. So this little guy up here, and the parent all have the same DNA. Okay, now this last one over here, this plant here, if you look on the side here, there's another little one growing right here. Okay, so this is an offshoot of the parent, and a lot of plants will do this. They'll send out of the root system and they'll just start growing a separate plant, and then you could actually dig this little guy up and plant him in his own pot, and he would survive just fine, and he'd be a clone of the parent. So a lot of greenhouses will do this. They'll take all these little guys, repot them, and they're able to sell them as separate plants. So plants, animals, bacteria, they all can do this asexual reproduction. Now, do humans do this? Yeah, you do. All of your hair cells, your fingernail cells, your skin cells, they all do this. Anytime your body has to make a new cell to fix something or to make something grow, you're doing this. You're not reproducing a whole human. You're just reproducing one cell of your body at a time. All right, now sexual reproduction involves the blank of two separate parent cells. And the word that goes in there would be fusion. So for humans, this would be a sperm from the male and an egg from a female. And that sperm and egg will come together and make one new cell. Okay, and that's called fusion. And the child, the offspring, will have some DNA from the dad's sperm and some DNA from the mom's egg. So the child will be a mixture of both parents. That's what sexual reproduction is. Okay, so the DNA is not the same as the parents. Okay, so in your textbook, you're going to see a chart like this, and in your foundations packet, you have a Venn diagram. So it may be worthwhile to take a screenshot of this picture here. Asexual reproduction, you make a lot of offspring in a short period of time. So this can go really fast. So bacteria can do this in your body. If you get one strep throat bacteria in your throat, after 24 hours, you can have 1,000 of them making you sick. Okay? Sexual reproduction, it takes longer. Okay? So you have less offspring and it takes longer to make those cells and for that fused cell to grow. Okay? So asexual, you can make a ton of babies really fast. Sexual reproduction takes more time, it's more complicated. Asexual, you don't need a mate. If you are locked in a cave all by yourself, if you are a bacteria in a test tube, you can reproduce all by yourself. Sexual reproduction, you need to have a partner or nothing's going to happen. Okay? Asexual reproduction, as long as the environment stays stable, so not too hot, not too cold, not too salty, these offspring do great. They thrive. They live great. They reproduce great. Everybody's happy. Okay? But if the environment changes, if the environment suddenly gets too hot, they all have the same DNA. They all might die together. Okay? Now, this is good for us with bacteria because if you have hundreds of thousands of strep throat bacteria, one little antibiotic might kill them all in one shot. So that's a good thing for us when we're talking about bacteria. Okay? Now, in a changing environment, and if you think about planet Earth is always changing, right? The weather's changing from season to season. We have global warming. We have natural disasters, volcanoes, earthquakes. If all of the creatures have different DNA, they might all have different skills. Some might be able to live in slightly warmer or slightly colder places. Some of those offspring might be a little faster or a little slower or have better eyesight or whatever special skill they have to help them survive when the environment changes. Okay? So it's really easy for things that are clones of each other, that are all the same, to all die at the same time. If everybody's a little different, if there's some kind of disaster, it's likely that a few at least will survive and can reproduce in the future. Okay, so that's what this last sentence is all about as well. So an asexual, if the conditions change, the offspring are maybe not well adapted and they all might die. But with sexual reproduction, with everybody being a little bit different from each other, they're able to survive. Okay, but whatever the current conditions are, so the current temperature and situation on planet Earth, some are better suited than others. So some humans are healthier than other humans because we're all a little bit different. Okay, so you should know some of these things that are kind of good things and bad things about reproducing asexually or sexually, and be able to kind of compare them. Your to-do list here is, now that we've summarized all of section 1, go ahead and go read it, look at the pictures, look at the stories with it in the textbook. So this should not take you real long, like 5 minutes maybe. It's a lot of pictures, and like I said, we just talked about everything in there. And then you have a packet called the Foundations packet where we want to do the first lesson. Okay? We're going to do lesson 2 later this week, and then you'll have until Friday to get those 2 things done. Lesson 3 and lesson 4 are in that packet, but you may cross them out. We're only going to do lesson 1 and 2. So let me show you what this looks like on Schoology here real quick, guys. So your Schoology page probably doesn't look exactly like this, but you've got a copy of the textbook here. There's also a tutorial of how to get into the interactive textbook. That's got some cool things where it will read to you. It'll translate things into Spanish for you. Little video clips of stuff. So this is a pretty cool thing, but if you're looking for the shortest, fastest way to do this, the PDF is a good way to do that. You can download the PDF, so if your internet goes out, or if you're like traveling in a bus or a car, you've got that without an internet connection. Okay, the foundations packet here looks like this. So on the first page here, you're going to notice there's not a lot of reading to do, but it does have a Venn diagram comparing those things that we just talked about. And then it has a summary of the textbook. Okay, so like we talked about the surface area to volume, the traffic problems. Your book has all the math done that you can just copy into there for that. Okay, talks about asexual and sexual reproduction, and that's the end of the lesson. So for today, you're just going to kind of review the math of how we do this surface area and volume thing, and you can copy it directly out of the textbook, and then you have to fill in this Venn diagram, and that's it. We will do lesson 2 later this week, and you may cross out lesson 3 and 4. So that is it for this video, guys. Hopefully everything made sense. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. Have a great day, guys.